Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. That we're professionals, and that's fabulous. Great. So, Jack, I'm so excited, actually. I'm really glad to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Well, glad to speak to another fellow from the UK. You guys talk a little funny, but other than that, I have great admiration for the Brits.
We are joined and both separated by our language. So,
I love your sense of humor. I mean, almost every successful sitcom in the U.S. was modeled after one that originated in your country.
Well, I do see these kind of clips on media, social media, that when you're talking to soldiers, the British soldiers and the American soldiers, they say, you know, we're joined by the focus, we're joined by the strategy. But the thing that we struggle with is just that, you know, that English mentality of it doesn't matter how bad things are, let's put the kettle on and make a cup of tea, which always makes me laugh. So, right, listen, I'm going to make good use of this time with you. I clearly know who you are. You've been incredibly gracious to make some time to speak to me. I generally don't do introductions. I ask people to introduce themselves, and I think there's no better way than starting this by saying, and it becomes particularly relevant with you, who the hell is Jack Barsky? It would be good to get some insight into that.
Well, you're asking in a roundabout way the same question that I was asked out of the blue in my first interview ever, and it was with CBS 60 Minutes. Like, that should be scary, right? But somehow I don't scare him in the situations like that. So when he asked me, who are you? That's even more like, it's a challenging question to ask anybody. But then, you know, I hadn't really figured out exactly who I was, because, I was still a stranger in a strange land, not anymore. I was still not fully 100% Americanized, and you know, I had this. I have a split personality. You know, for the listeners or the viewers, I was born and raised in Germany, so I'm genetically German, or like half German and a quarter Czech and Polish, but not British or American or English, whatever. So genetically raised in the German culture, and then learned, studied, or observed to imitate, to operate as a born American on behalf of foreign intelligence that in those days was the KGB. So when I set foot on the territory of the United States, about 3 days later, I destroyed the passport that I was coming into the country with, and pulled out a birth certificate, a bona fide copy of a birth certificate for Jack Barsky out of a secret compartment in my luggage. And from that point on, I pretended to have been born in the country as Jack Barsky. That was rather bold, because I spoke English very well in those days. I had studied the heck out of it, and my accent was, I still have a touch of an accent, but in those days it was a little stronger. But I was able to pull it off because, for two reasons. I was deployed in New York City, and in New York City, if you think you're an odd person, there's always somebody more odd than you. So nobody really pays attention. So you have an accent. Everybody has an accent in New York. So, but none of that I actually knew. I was not prepared culturally whatsoever. And so it took me about 2 years to freely socialize, and even more time to feel like I really made it. And that took, and it's still not done. As you know, we're all growing in some way. And I'm now, the growth that I'm experiencing is in the English language, English thinking, and within the U.S. culture, good, bad, and indifferent. So there are definitely layers to me. And one thing I wanted to point out with dual personality, and I have not, I wish a neurologist would one day examine my brain, because this is what happens. If somebody pops into my room right now and says something in German, my English is blocked. There's no strong connection between the two of them. I can't translate. Anytime it may happen in this interview that you're going to ask me a question and the German answer, the German word pops into my head, and all of a sudden I freeze. So now, with regard to, I know really who I am now. I have evolved. I was just talking with a good friend of mine. There's a difference between being self-conscious, how others see you, and try to like live up to their expectations, and self-awareness. And I had a period in my life, in the last like 3-4 years, where I was able to really take a look inside. Part of that was a friend of mine convinced me to write a master class to teach young men to embrace their manhood, and and are comfortable with it. And fundamentally, now that I'm thinking about it, I wrote this thing for myself, because this class is everything. I had to look back and where I started and where I am today, and all of that is really about me, and so it was a worthwhile endeavor. So who I am? You want me to summarize me?
Well, if it helps in this process, that'd be lovely.
Well, I can summarize that. Uh, I'm a self-aware, stable, positive thinker who likes to spread this positivity and his faith to the rest of the world, and it resonates with people. When I show up nowadays, and this, I'm not making this up, it's based on feedback that I get all the time, that people like me show up rather than want me to leave. And that's a good way of being. When you you do something nice for somebody, you put a smile on somebody else's face, that really does something for your soul. And I call this the existence. It doesn't always work. Usually when I wake up in the morning, I'm sort of somewhat miserable, but it goes away after a while. But I very often experience an existence that I can only explain with a term, the lightness of being. It's not physical. It's spiritually and emotionally, that you just feel like you're floating around and everything is wonderful. And that's a good way to be at my age.
It's actually because it does lead me to something else. Actually, if I may be so bold, I'll go first. I'm 56. So, Jack, how old are you right now?
You want the age, huh? 76.
76. Okay, so that gives me a target for what good looks like when I'm 76. So
But I
that's good for
feel
me.
literally, and this is not an exaggeration, a lot of people rationalize when they get older. Well, I feel like I'm 30 years younger. I feel like I'm maybe 50. I am physically in excellent shape. I have super high energy. You know, if you let me talk, I can talk for the rest of the day and not get tired. And when I'm done, I feel actually refreshed. The doctors that are looking for stuff in me lately have not found anything. I had two health sort of emergencies, without getting into detail, that had to be treated, and I'm doing very well. As I'm sitting here at my age, there's no arthritis, there's no pain, there's no back pain, there's nothing other than double vision and a little bit of sciatica on my right foot. And I'm really proud of that one, and I had nothing to do with it. This is, well, maybe something. It's because it has to do with to some degree with exercise. I recently had a bone marrow sample taken for analysis, and the nurse that took it, she has done this for like close to 10 years. She complained. She said, "This is the toughest bone I ever bored into." That is great, because when I go to the doctor, they always worry about falling at my age. If you fall, you break a bone. First of all, I know how to fall, and I have fallen, and I don't break anything. So what can I tell you? You know, my entire demeanor is much younger than most people my age, and that is one of the reasons that I have my best friends are all significantly younger than me. You know, because we have something in common. I'm not looking back. I'm still looking forward to what's next.
Beautiful. Help me with a little something. I grew up with watching Harry Palmer, Michael Caine playing Harry Palmer in films like The Icarus File.
What's the film title?
The Icarus File, where he goes over the wall into Berlin. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Yeah, Michael Caine, Harry Palmer, big thick glasses, the old kind of the older films. And those were films that were like The $1 Million Brain and things like that. I don't know if you've seen these kind of things, but I'm a massive Michael Caine fan. But the point was, you know, the Cold War, you know, that it's a thing that was of an age that your story is, and we're going to get into it, but it's fascinating because it does feel like, I understand it to a point, but it does, I imagine if you're in your 20s or 30s listening to this, it contextually, to understand what was going on back then, it must feel, you know, to me, it feels like a story of an age that is something that people can intellectually understand. But depending on how old you are, it's a long way away. And I'd like to bring to life a little bit of what was the, you know, what the world felt like
What
back
the world
when
felt like.
when you were approached.
Yeah.
You know, what was the world like back then? Because I don't think people really know it unless you're of an age.
So I can share you my worldview in those days. And fundamentally, we divided the earth into three sections. The evil capitalist imperialist section, the noble and future-oriented and what would become the future of the entire world, the communist section, and the third world, you know, the developing countries. And I was of the strong belief that, you know, communist ideology, and if anybody actually just takes a look at what Marx and Engels wrote and what Lenin wrote, whether they acted in the same way doesn't matter, but because there's a lot of misinterpretation these days. Well, they're communists, and just because people are more left wing or whatever, and have you know, are more collectivist. The communist notion of everybody being safe, there's no exploitation of man by man, there's no war. It's like paradise on earth, and it is incredibly romantic. the maxim of how capitalism is supposed to function, no, communism is supposed to function, is from everybody based on their ability to everybody based on their needs. And this is the foundation of the downfall of the whole idea, because who determines what my abilities are, and who determines what you need? And that requires a governing body, and that is the party. And then once you have a governing body, you know that people have power. There's the human nature sets in. You got power, you want to hold on to it. And so what happened when Lenin took power during the October Revolution, he immediately, never mind the romantic notion of communism, he immediately went to work and started something called the Red Terror, to eliminate, that means kill, enemies of the revolution. It was a bloodbath. There was no due process. There was no court of law. He just collected under Dzerzhinsky, who eventually became the head of the NKVD, which was the forerunner of the KGB. Under Dzerzhinsky collected a bunch of thugs that would just, and they had lists of people they were going to kill, and they killed them. And they even killed farmers who had too much land, just to make an example of people who have undeserved wealth and that kind of stuff. So the communist idea is highly romantic, and it will never go away. I see this, every new generation buys into it because it appeals to your heart. Yeah, why can't we all wonderful and nice? Well, when you look at the history of man, if you believe in that man is fundamentally good, I have a few examples to tell you that this is not realistic. That doesn't mean that most people aren't good, but man as a collective has done evil century after century after century, and progress fundamentally made it easier to kill more people.
I have this kind of thought that many ideologies are pure of intent, but they're infected by bad actors.
Absolutely, yes, 100%. And those bad actors, they are clearly the ones that make it to the top are intrinsically evil, because there are situations when and I have a couple of friends who worked in the East German government, which was communist, when the wall was up until the wall came down, and they were the kind of people that were really honest and wanted to do good, and then they get into that system, and they found out it's constructed by a bunch of lies. The State Planning Commission, there were two sets of books. Everybody was lying to everybody. So, and some of them just courageously found a way out of that system, and it's not that easy. But once you're in it, and that I think applies, and I'm not going to get into politics, but this is a philosophical statement that applies to any corrupt organization. You might join it with good intentions, but in order to function in that organization, you have to play by the rules, or else you can't get anything done. And before you know it, you get used to the rules and you rationalize, and then you're a member of that very corrupt system that you wanted to defeat.
Yeah, it's the normalization of things, I think, that
Yes,
very often they're incremental, I think, very often. Sometimes it's terrible and there's a survival reaction where you've got to get with the program quick. But I think very often it is a drip of small sort of jigsaw pieces that add up to be it a year later, be it 2 years later. You've gone, for the want of a better word, you've gone native, and it's only an outsider's view that can probably see that.
Yeah, and just one comment, if I may, I may come across as a curmudgeon, as an old fart who is now negative at the end of his life. I'm not. I am intrinsically optimistic. I'm just observing what happens to man. There's so much good to be said about the people that I interact with, such as you and many, many others, and they are bubbles of greatness and goodness, but they're always subject to that evil that lurks around the corner. And we us good people need to have our eyes open and not fall for that.
Well, you're a realist. Mike Tyson was speaking to somebody. Who was he speaking to? A gentleman called Francis Ngannou. I think I'm saying the surname. And the point is that Mike Tyson said, "Oh, you're doing very well in life. You're making a lot of money. You're becoming very popular and famous, and so you're favoured by God." And Francis goes, "Yeah, yeah." And he goes, "But also bear in mind that the moment you're favoured by God, you're also favoured by the devil, because the devil chases the ones that are favoured by God."
Well,
And that
you
really
act.
struck hard with me. Actually, I've got to say that changed my life a little bit when I heard that.
Yeah, I tell people that when real, and I don't want to use the S word, but you know what I'm talking. When bad things happen to me in life,
Hmm.
uh, I think that that's the work of the devil because I'm on the right path, and he wants to just get me off of that path. Are you familiar with C.S. Lewis?
The screw tape.
This, yeah,
Is it the
and
screw tape?
this is where
Screw
C.S.
tape
Lewis
letters? Yeah.
talks about a senior devil teaching a junior devil how to get people off of their righteous path by distractions. And boy, oh boy, are we in a society that is rife and teeming with distractions.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is the beauty of a conversation like this. You know, you start on one thing and you bounce to another, and that's a beautiful thing. I think I have come, and it's taken me a little while to get there in life, but discipline, the discipline of focus, the discipline of not allowing yourself to drift, the discipline of etc. Again, I think there are lots of unsuccessful, highly motivated people because they didn't possess the discipline to actually focus and stay on track. And I think discipline is the thing that separates. If I look at maturity in people now, I used to, there's maybe many things, but actually, everybody that I see that I look at and hold in some form of reverence, it's because they have some form of discipline.
Yeah, and I don't claim to be fully disciplined. I get distracted, but there's some things that people admire me for instance, that I do regularly, even though I don't necessarily like it. I go out for a run every night, no matter what. Uh, and I go to the gym and lift weights, and I hate lifting weights. But I just must. I cannot not do it. And that's, yeah, I think this partially because of my genetic makeup, the Germanic discipline and the way I was brought up, and I carried this forward. But particularly in the digital world, one has to remind oneself not to get sidetracked. Okay,
I
because
think that's it.
there's always another signal over there. And say, oh, wait a minute, I'm not sidetracked by entertainment stuff, but you know, but as we're talking, if I could, I would go to ChatGPT and ask her a question to uh, shed a little light on what I just heard or said. that, but, we can veer off the path because we don't have one. The whole idea is to just have a conversation, and that's okay. But when you want to get things done, you got to stay focused.
I've got a 12-year-old, and the one thing, if I can teach him anything, it'll be the ability to have fun and do silly things, and because what's the point of life otherwise? But actually, when it's time to go, it's the discipline of focus, putting things to one side and getting on with it. And I think that's the key. So if I take us back, we set the scene there to a point of a different era. However, things very often are very similar, but just are presented now in different ways. I think there are ruling elites in the world. There are powers, and they shift and they flow, and every decade maybe different people come to different places of power. So we can identify it by country, by state, by organizations like investment companies like BlackRock, and
Right.
who now dominate. I mean, what was a nation state is now an investment company.
And don't forget the
So
high-tech companies.
exactly,
Talking about power structures.
yeah. So we could, that would be with a bottle of wine and a pizza. That would be a fantastic evening's conversation. But I guess I just want to pull back to when somebody knocked on your maybe actual door or metaphorical door.
No, it wasn't an actual door. There was a knock.
Well, there you go then. So when the proverbial knock came at the door, how does that go? Is it a subtle testing? Is it a demand of expectation?
I am sorry. I
Apologize.
have the phone on. It shouldn't ring. Okay, I have it on. So, but you can edit this out, right?
No. But so how did that? Is it? Would you be interested, or was it no? This is what you're going to do now. But pack your bags. I mean,
No.
give me a sense of that.
It was extremely stealthy, subtle, pretty stupid, and incompetent. That first knock and when the person came in and started talking, if I am aware, if I'm in charge of that unit there and I'm aware of his behavior, I would have fired him on the spot. But the intent was to just very cautiously get in touch with me. So I was in my dorm room on a Saturday, and oh, by the way, there were no signs on the dorm room. There were no names. How did he know that I could be found there on a Saturday, and that my roommate wasn't in the room? That we had an exchange student, a Russian, in the next room. Guarantee you, he was KGB. So, they found me somehow, most likely by looking through the records that the Stasi kept on most adults. And in my records, I was a standout because I had received the Karl Marx scholarship in my junior year. And now listen to this, that was so elite. It was, and I double checked to make sure that I don't say something that's not true. I triple checked. It was restricted to 100 concurrent holders in the entire country. So I was a standout. They knew that I was smart. They also knew that I was a communist. So now it's try put yourself into the mindset of a recruiter. They were looking for candidates to do the job that I did. That is, become an illegal, become another person, and actually operate pretty much in isolation as a lone wolf. It takes a lot of not just smarts, not just ideology. It takes a lot of inborn character traits, like things like really quick thinking, no problem with changing situations, no problem leaving your country, going someplace else all by yourself, no fearlessness, and all these things. Those were not in the files. So the initial, never mind that the guy was incompetent, but the thought was to just make a contact and then see if the person is actually willing to listen, because you don't recruit somebody for that kind of a role with any kind of coercion, force, because when there's resistance, you just created yourself a defection. So it needs to come. First of all, the person needs to be qualified and needs to be willing, passionate about doing this. So they had to get to know me. So this guy introduced himself as a representative of a local optics company. Actually, if you're familiar, they're still in existence, Carl Zeiss Jena. And he gave me the impression that he was trying to recruit me for that to work for the company after I'm done with my degree. The stupidity was that in those days, nobody in East Germany, no companies recruited. You were assigned after you had your diploma. Some of us had, the top tier had the ability to go for a doctorate, but eventually you were still assigned. There was no free will. There was no choice. So, but anyway, he, without getting too much into detail, he sensed. I gave him an indirect answer to a question when he asked, if I could imagine to work for the government one of these days, and I said, and this was a pretty clever answer. I'm still proud of it because I said, yeah, but not as a chemist. So I gave him an answer to a question that he didn't even have to ask, made it easy on him. So he then, we met again 3 days later at a restaurant, and he introduced me to a person. They were sitting at the table. I walk in, and they both got up, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I want to introduce you to Herman. We are working with our Soviet comrades." Okay, and then I forgot exactly. He excused himself. He never introduced himself by any kind of name or label. He was just this one figure who just took me to Herman, and Herman was obviously a KGB agent. And I knew when the German said we work with our Soviet comrades, I knew it was KGB. At that point, nothing had to be stated. The whole unofficial way of contacting me meant that had to be intelligence, and since it wasn't Stasi, it was KGB. So, and Herman and I became really good friends. He was the person who was in charge of studying me, but I had what it takes. 18 months. 18 months. So he studied my character. We met every other week for about an hour in a conspiratorial flat where the owner would be out when we met for an hour. We talked about what it would be like to be an agent. We talked about life in general. He was like a father figure to me because he was old enough to qualify, and my father was out of my life. And I was still in a growth phase. For instance, I was really shy around the girls, and I had my own doubts about this and that, and I shared everything with this fellow, and including like mistakes that I made that nobody else knew I made them. So and now in hindsight, I guarantee you, every time we met, he sat down and wrote a report, and it piled up in a box, a bunch of papers. He also gave me tasks to do. To see if I could function, sort of basic tradecraft, not the technical stuff, but getting to know somebody and finding out about them, befriending them, and getting information out of them without them realizing. We call it elicitation, without them realizing that you were after that information. And I hated this stuff, but I couldn't fail. So I went and I was successful with every task. So it was 18 months later when I was finally called to Berlin. And under a pretext to get more training, that is when I actually was recruited. 18 months after. And up until that point, just like my curiosities are just play along, okay? There was no
Is,
downside.
is there, when you look back on this through the lens of an adult, I may not use the word vulnerable, but spotting that if your father wasn't in your life, if you're a person that's quite intelligent and likes a task and likes to achieve and is curious, is that part of that kind of behavioral kind of conditioning that if the right person approaches the right person, they can fulfill a father figure role, they can give you rewards, they can. Is that part of
I
that
think
process, or is that a bit
you're
too simple?
overthinking this a little bit. However, the fact that my father was out of my life and it became very clear that I did not have a loving relationship with my mother, that played a role. Because if I had had functioning parents, and particularly a father as an advisor, as a mentor, I most likely would have said no, I'm not going to do this. But I didn't, and my mother was conditioned. She grew up during World War II, and she was conditioned to treat her children the way she was treated. Tough love. So it's based on, survival skills.
So was this an ideological choice? Was it an excitement choice? A little
Yes,
bit
it
of
was.
both?
It was both. Good question. You answered your own question pretty much. Uh, Ideology was the foundation. I mean, n- only crazy people would do something that dangerous with regard to the uh, probability of failure and move away from a life that had nothing but success uh, as a headline. Uh, Nobody would sign up for something like that unless it is in service of a higher cause. And it isn't just communism. There's all kinds of causes people just like bend over backwards for, and some of them, in some cases, die for. Yes. So that was the foundation. If I'm not a believing communist, if I don't think that I will be contributing to freeing the oppressed masses on the planet, then I wouldn't have done it. But the notion that I would also be able to have my cake and eat it too, because I knew one thing, that the standard of living in the West was significantly higher than in the East, and you know, becoming a KGB agent, I knew I would be able to travel to all kinds of countries that otherwise were closed off to East German citizens. And we also had an East German version of James Bond. There was a TV series called The Invisible Visor, and around Christmas there was every time we couldn't wait for another episode. And that was about a Stasi agent who was an illegal in the West. He was smuggled in uh, when prisoners of war came back from the Soviet Union. So he pretended to be one of them, and he was hunting down Nazis. But he also had a romantic life.
Oh,
He
boy.
also had fancy cars and lived in nice places. And I occasionally take another peek at a few clips. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's just James Bond, communist James Bond. And subtly, during my recruitment, I was fed that romantic notion, very subtly, not strongly, just like reminding me that one day, I need to pretend to be like a rich individual so I can fit in, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so you got it. It's and if I can add one more determining factor for me signing up, it's pride. It's ego. If the most powerful intelligence agency of the world is recruiting you, I mean, yeah, look at me.
Oh, I feel it now a little bit. I mean, it would be something. So, did you? I mean, I'm asking I'm asking silly questions in the context of I don't know the language, but did you go to spy school? To learn spy stuff.
There was no school, but of course uh, all my training was either self-teaching, teaching myself, or one-on-one. No, there were no classes. There was no building where you would show up every morning. The teaching that was really good, and it really didn't become very good until I spent 2 years in Moscow, was the technical aspects of tradecraft. So we're talking about Morse code, shortwave reception, secret writing, photography. Encryption and decryption, and cryptography, and surveillance detection, dead drop operations. You know what that is? So when you hand over material without meeting somebody, brush passes, something like you also, you give another agent something without stopping and talking, anything like that, and also meetings. All of that training was outstanding. The language training was a lot of self-teaching, and I had tutors. What in Moscow, I actually had an American-born citizen, and I worked with her. I met her twice a week for over a year, and we obviously we spoke English from day one, and then to improve my ability to speak English as a man, I was given the opportunity to interact with Morris Cohen. Morris Cohen was a member, him and his wife Lana, they were members of the Rosenberg spy ring and American citizens. And they managed to flee before they were captured by U.S. counterintelligence. Had another stint, a 10-year stint, doing work as illegals in your country. I forgot. There's a town, and I think it still exists where there's our facilities. For nuclear submarines, where nuclear submarines are built and tested and so forth, and they were spying on that, and they wound up in jail. They were caught, but eventually were exchanged and lived their life out in Moscow. And my idea of it being good to have been an ex-KGB agent, they lived in luxury. And in the best in Arbatskaya, that was the number one street downtown in Moscow, and Morris really made sure that my pronunciation is as good as it could be. And when he said I'm ready, that's when he gave the green light for my launch. What was non-existent. And if it was attempted, it was terribly wrong, is teaching me how Americans operate. Morris was an old man, and he had his own idiosyncrasies. they're like 30, 40 years older than me. So there was no psychological training. I never took a psychological test. Uh, the only the only thing that resembled something about culture, one of my trainer's handlers gave me the book by Dale Carnegie, uh, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, I read the book, but I didn't get much out of it because I didn't have context. I wasn't in the country. I read the book many years later, and yeah, that works really well. But these people didn't. The people that trained me thought they were experts in what it's like to be an American because they were the only Soviet citizens that were in the United States and interacted with Americans, and they were diplomats. So I give that example as what it's like, what it was like for them. It's like when you go to in the city of Atlanta, there's this phenomenal aquarium, like huge, and you can spend hours watching sharks and all kinds of fish swimming around, and then you walk away and you think you know what it's like to be a fish? No, I was gonna be a fish, and they couldn't teach me how to be a fish. I had to learn this over time by observing and imitating and learning my lessons. And you have to give credit to the KGB. That's one of the reasons they picked me, because they knew if they threw me into the water, I would find a way to swim. And I did. So I'm still here. I was pretty successful.
So you get to the US, that's, and then what's that first? Let's just give it that first 12 months. Is it find yourself a job, or no? There's already a job for
No, no,
you.
no, no,
Is
no,
it
no, no, no,
just
no,
what?
no,
Yeah,
no,
just
no,
walk
no.
me through that. I'm here day one, and just how does that walk us
Yeah,
through that?
the I all I had with me when I came to the U.S. was that birth certificate. I had a shortwave radio to receive transmissions from Moscow, and I had some cash left, maybe $6,000, $7,000 to live in the country. You can't get a job without a social security card. I didn't have a driver's license. We were not using forged documents. And the birth certificate was a genuine copy that was acquired by a KGB agent diplomat. I don't. They never told me how they got a hold of it, but it was all on the up and up. And then I had to get a driver's license, and then I had to get a social security number, which was possible in those days, when because in those days uh, babies were not assigned a number at birth. You you could get one, but it was not a requirement. So and this was it took me a year to get these documents because the instructions that they gave me in Moscow didn't work. So I had to find workarounds, and it gets to be too much detail to get into this. But again, it took a full year, during which time I needed another infusion of KGB money to exist because I couldn't get an apartment without having ID. But you could get yourself a hotel room in a seedy hotel by just like writing your name in as John Smith or something like that. In those days, nobody checked ID. So I stayed in a hotel and I paid my the bill in cash. And when I finally had my social security card, then it was time to look for a job. And again, the instructions that I got from the KGB were not workable. They thought maybe I should be a taxi driver. Yeah, I learned enough by just observing that driving a taxi is a more than full-time job, and it doesn't pay very well because the people that made the money were the ones that owned the cabs. And the other suggestion was like, how about you work in the harbor in downtown Manhattan as a stevedore. Well, yeah, dream on, but well paid, but it's fully unionized. You have to have connections. So I did my research. I looked at the wanted ads, and I couldn't find anything. And one day I said, wait a minute, there was an ad in there for messengers. I figured, messenger, I don't need to show a resume for that. And I just needed a job. I didn't need a well-paying job. If I needed more money, I would have gotten it from the KGB. So I showed up on a Monday morning at the headquarters of the messenger office, and I asked them if they're still hiring. And the guy looked at me, and apparently I made a good impression physically. He said, can you ride a bike? That was pure luck, because one thing I didn't know, that bike messengers made a lot of money. And I said to him, not knowing exactly what I was saying yes to, he says, yeah, sure. Oh, he asked me, do you have a bike? I said, no, but I can get one, and I can ride one. Growing up in East Germany, that was our primary means of transportation. Wherever we went by bicycle to school and so forth. There was no school buses. So, and I was not afraid of joining the crazy Manhattan traffic. Next day I showed up with a bike and a bag, and I was a bike messenger, and I started delivering packages. And on payday, I found out that my pay was like 5 times higher than the people on foot. They got minimum wage. I was on commission, because this was a job that most people didn't feel like doing. It was very dangerous. And I had 2 accidents, one dislocated shoulder, and another one, I'm not exaggerating, I came very close to being run over by a semi-truck, a big truck. Very close. I was on the ground, and I fell, and if I had fallen in the wrong direction, my head would have been crushed. So I survived, and the KGB folks, 2 years after entering the U.S., I was called back for, debriefing, and some rest and relaxation, and as well as spending time with my German family. I was actually married in Germany, and I had a young child at that time. So that's another part of the story. But right now, I just want to tell you, when I told them how much money I was making, their eyes went, wow. I think that impressed them greatly. So that's the long answer to the question. The first year, it was the first year, and then I spent 2.5 years working as a bike messenger. That was it, until it was time to go take the next step.
And that's where it gets interesting for me. This is a slow burn.
Yeah, very much a lot. It's a long game. Absolutely. And what I was not told explicitly, obviously I knew instinctively that people like me, and I had no idea how many others were there. There's material available that was smuggled out of KGB archives that indicates that during the Cold War, the height of the Cold War in the late 70s, early 80s, the KGB trained 10 of us. There's no proof as to how many were actually sent and how many were successful. I doubt that it was more than a handful that survived like I did. So, but we were the insurance policy. God forbid the Cold War becomes hot. We would have gotten some kind of instruction. Nothing, no preparation. I wasn't even told. They kept everything very, very secret. I understand why now. It's a double-edged sword. If you share too much with somebody like me, we are a risk for defection. If we do really well and become acclimatized, and as I eventually had a family, you know too much. You shouldn't know anything, right? But on the other hand, if you don't know at least the basics, you're going to make decisions based on your own understanding. So anyway, I sensed that what was important to them, and it was confirmed later on in a couple of interviews by ex-heads of the Directorate S, the KGB section that was in charge of illegals. We were the insurance policy. If a diplomatic relations were broken up, we would have interacted with, I name only two names because they're well known, with the two most successful KGB spies in the United States during the Cold War. They were both high-level employees of the FBI and the CIA, Robert Hansen and Aldrich Ames. And and they did a lot of damage to the United States, and they handed their material that they smuggled out of their offices to the diplomats. If there are no more diplomats, who can receive the packages? So that was important. There was an idea that eventually I should, become a wealthy American, to befriend people who are in charge of foreign policy, or directly in charge of foreign policy, or influence foreign policy, like think tanks. And the plan was, and that was brilliant, for me to get the documentation and then get a bona fide U.S. passport, no forgeries, and then move to a German-speaking capitalist country such as Switzerland or Austria and open up a business, and the KGB would fund that business. They were really good at money laundering. And then return to the United States reasonably wealthy so I could join a country club. We're talking about maybe $100,000 after like 3 years, and that would have been well over $1 million. And I wouldn't have to tell anybody, how did you make the money? Well, I had this business over there in Zurich, and it did really well. That failed. That plan would have made me into an extremely dangerous agent, because I had what it takes as far as my personality, my overall education, the knowledge that I could mingle with people, with really smart people, and then you got the money, and I had the personality as well to. In hindsight, I know it now. I wasn't so aware of it, but I was quite likable, so I was able to make friends easily, and thank God today I say that I was denied the passport because I made a mistake in the application on the form. I wrote they asked for profession, and I wrote messenger, which was the truth. I should have written down contractor, because that's what I really was. So I was messenger, and everybody knew that messengers make minimum wage. And then there was a section where they asked what my travel plans were, and where I was going to go, and when I had planned to go there. And it was optional. I left it out, and that raised a flag. So here is a person who makes minimum wage, who doesn't know where he wants to go, and he doesn't know when he wants to go there. So the agent at the passport office asked me to, he said directly, I will never forget these words, "We have some doubt about your identity. No problem, just fill out this questionnaire." Okay, so I was still confident. Yeah, no, the questionnaire, big deal. But question one, I was I went to the back and, I looked at the questionnaire, and question one said, "Where did you go to high school?" Well, I was smart enough to know that I can't answer the question with the high school that we had in my backstory, because it was very unlikely that Jack Barsky ever went to that school. It was a school for the gifted. Peter Stuyvesant still does exist. So there weren't too many students there, and Jack Barsky was not a common name. So I knew I was busted. So I managed to get out of that trap by just like going back there and cursing under my breath and saying, like, I don't need this S word, right? Fill in with the S word. I forget about it. And I had the presence of mind to take my application and the documentations that the guy still had sitting in front of him, and I walked out. And the next weeks, I did a lot of surveillance detection and took some measure to see if I was being watched. I was not. That was another moment of really, really good luck. I got through, but that now activated Plan B. Now I was already a U.S. citizen with documentation except for the passport. You didn't need that. I don't need a passport today unless I want to come to the UK. And so there was another way to maybe become wealthy, and they told me, well, let's go to college, study economics, and then get a Wall Street job. So I went to college. I finished at what most people took 5 years and 3 years. Surprise, okay. The problem was that I made a mistake that also could have damaged me significantly, or could have pointed attention to my very being, because I graduated as valedictorian, and I had to give the graduation speech at Madison Square Garden, 4,000 people in the audience, and here's a guy who was about 10 years older than the average graduate, and spoke with a touch of an accent. And the teachers knew about me. They knew I had raced through that program by taking overloads and summer school, and aced everything. And some of the teachers, particularly in my major, they really liked me. And nobody after the event was over, was hanging out with a bunch of classmates, and we were talking to some teachers. Nobody who was in the audience, not a journalist, and there was a major event, Madison Square Garden, not a journalist, not the school newspaper, not any curious parents asked me, where did you go to high school? How did you manage to? What motivated you? All kinds of questions. Not a one. That could have also caused a problem for me. So I got by with being pretty good, but also being quite lucky.
So at this point, what value have you added? Because they played a 5-6 year game so far, positioning you.
Yeah.
You're maneuvering the chess piece around the board.
Okay. Sort of minor value, but again, they by the way, they never, ever gave me feedback saying good job with this particular task or good job with that. Nothing. I did get, in my 8th year, I was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union. That means they had to, actually the KGB had to go to the government and say, we want this guy to get this order. And so they must have seen value that I'm piecing together. Again, I told you about the insurance policy. I I was most likely one of maybe 3 or 4 illegals that made it in the United States. But I never knew explicitly the value that I otherwise provided. I was always operating as a spotter. So spotter is like looking for talent who might be a good target for recruitment. And so particularly while I was in college, I profiled quite a few fellow students who I suspected could wind up in government, who had a passion for one thing or another, or weakness in that kind of thing. So that must have been of value, but they never told me. I never knew whether they tried to recruit any of them, except for one. And that is when they asked me. This was a citizen of that's the island. That's Cyprus. He came from Cyprus, and he was a socialist, if not communist. And I profiled him, and one day I got a request from the KGB to find out, he had moved, and to find out where he lives. And I managed to, I had the address of his brothers, and so I found out. So they had talked with him for sure, or wanted to talk with him. That was the only case. The other thing that I thought wasn't of value, but in hindsight, again, it definitely was. Periodically, once every 3-4 months, more like 3 months, they asked me to write a report about what the American people's attitude toward major events in the world. Now I was thinking, why is that of value? I'm talking to a bunch of people. I'm not a research institute. Yeah, but compared to the diplomats, when they talked with Americans, they spoke with an accent. They were known as diplomats, as Russians. No American would give them their honest opinion, right? Or very few. So what they wound up is copying stuff from the New York Times and the Washington Post. So in that respect, and even if it just from a career angle, the people that ran me, that handled me, would be able to go to their boss and say, see what we got from this guy? This is the real deal. There's always this element of positioning yourself no matter what kind of an organization you work for, okay? and I think that also played a role in giving me the Order of the Red Banner. See, what we got our man right embedded there. Okay, I don't really care. I'm just telling you exactly what I observed. And one thing I could have... Oh, one more thing. And I was told that this was an assignment that every KGB agent had who worked in a enemy country. Periodically, everybody got assigned a military object to observe periodically to see if there's signs that indicate preparation for war. So they gave me the Naval Weapons Station Earl, which is still in existence on the New Jersey shore. I never noticed anything different, and there wasn't anything because the U.S. was not preparing for an attack. Well, just knowing that, is also valid intelligence, right? So, and where they failed miserably, and I could have, again, done a lot of damage when I started working in computers. I was a programmer, and I worked for MetLife, and that's public knowledge. I can name the company. MetLife, I worked in the group insurance business as a programmer, and I had access to the record of a lot of employees of companies that are part of the military-industrial complex, like Boeing, aircraft manufacturers and weapons manufacturers. I had access to the medical records of these people. And when I shared that in Moscow, there was no reaction. It was like I was telling them it's snowing outside. That was, I mean, how dumb can you be? I mean, if you locate an individual who's an engineer and he is a drug addict, he's in treatment, or there's a child that is in serious trouble and the insurance denied claims, these are the most perfect targets for recruitment. So there's a good reason. Well, in one of my presentations, I give examples like this, and there are many more. It's a good reason I call the KGB the Keystone Cops of intelligence. There was so much ineptitude. It's amazing, and some of it was good, and they, they did damage, but the most damage that they did as far as espionage was because people who reported to them, people who volunteered, walked into the Soviet embassy and with the material, and they wanted to get paid. Like Ames particularly did this for money. Hansen did it more out of pride, but as an offensive intelligence agency, relying on their own tools and means, they were reasonably incompetent.
So you have a wife and a child at this point.
Yeah, in East Germany.
Yeah. So what was the reality of that? Because you didn't have the internet and you couldn't just do a video call.
Well, yeah, but there was no interaction during the time I was in the United States. Occasionally, maybe there was maybe a little blurb, a very short one, in the radiogram, but clearly they couldn't send a long report because these radiograms take a while to take down and then decipher. So there was really no communication, none. Okay, between me and my German wife, and so every 2 years I went back and was able to spend some time with that family. So that was in 80, 80, 82, 84, and 86, 4 visits. Not enough to bond with my son. The very last visit in 86, he was maybe 5 years old, and I took a big teddy bear to give him, and he said to his mother, "Hey, look what this uncle just gave me." He didn't even realize I was his father. Did that bother me? I honestly, no, because my wife knew full well what she was getting into. She said, "I will wait for you. I tried other men. You're the one." And so, and I painted a rosy picture of the future, which was realistic, because the idea for me was not to spend the rest of my life in the United States. There's a shelf life for illegals like me. If we are too successful, we really become a risk for defection. And I was quite successful, as we will talk about soon. So I still loved my German wife, but the passion was out of it. It was more now I have a responsibility for a family, and they were very well taken care of. Okay, I mean, she was able to buy a car for which most people had to wait 10, 15 years. and she drove a luxury car, and she had a telephone. Private phones were very rare in those days. So and they had two vacations on the Black Sea, and they had a cook and a driver assigned to them. So that was a signal by the KGB, like, we're taking care of you guys.
Is there, and it might be different for different people, but is there a trauma in the duality of two lives?
There's a trauma to my very existence, which the duality has something to do with it. But here's a glimpse into my personality. I am what I would consider an extreme stoic. It took me a long time to actually discover feelings. I mean, other than, the passion that you have for a woman, but I just, I had empathy, and I still have it, but my empathy is primarily intellectual. If you cut yourself right now on screen, I don't feel your pain, but I'm worried about you. I understand that you're in pain.
I understand that.
So I could go through this life without being in pain, other than I had problems sleeping. And I took care of that by self-medicating. I became an alcoholic, totally functional. But, I needed a drink at night. And that started on day one when I came to the U.S. after the most stressful moment in my entire life, entering the U.S. with a false passport. And so I drank quite a bit of Johnny Walker Red to, fall asleep, and wound up with a big hangover. But anyway, that's I haven't really answered your question yet. I don't believe the dual personality, other than the language problems that I switch between German and English, and let me tell you something. Inside, and this was actually a task, inside of that bubble of falsehoods, the pretension that I was born in the U.S., inside that bubble, I was still myself. I was known as an honest, authentic guy, and I was known as an honest, authentic guy as a German. If I had started playing a role, I would have blown up. I had to be myself. If you act like somebody else, eventually you create traps for your own self. And the lies that I shared with people were just the basic foundational lies. So I didn't have to remember what I lied about yesterday. So no direct damage. The damage came when I realized that I had served the wrong master and had hurt people that were close to me, my German wife and my mother. And there may have been others, but I'm not aware of any others. These two clearly, they loved me, believed in me, and I disappeared eventually. And that took me quite some time to digest. There's no, can't make it better now, but I'm trying very, very hard, and I enjoy this actually, to get redemption by doing good for others.
So there was a point where you were on a mission or you were given a mission, and on a mission personally, you're on this journey. You have a North Star.
Yeah.
Is there a point where you hit maximum value and in essence could have kept going, or actually you had an internal shift and that changed things?
Yes. I get the question. There's two sides to that coin. I had become quite valuable to the KGB. And when initially the thought was, 10 years, roughly 10 years, and you're going to come back. There was no sign. I had reached the 10th anniversary. There was no indication that they wanted me back. That's part one of the answer. I didn't know how long they wanted me to stay. That probably would have been a year-by-year decision. Always worried about me defecting, right? But as far as I'm concerned, there were initially there were not necessarily ideological doubts. I had moved from radical communism to socialism. Sort of a welfare state kind of a situation. I had embraced the convergence theory that was concocted by socialist parties in Europe, where the idea was that to merge the good parts of capitalism and communism. And I knew one thing, that I had personal evidence that the capitalist system was significantly more powerful and more successful. So take some of that and then take the good part of communism. So I didn't have I still didn't feel bad about serving the Soviet Union. In fact, there's evidence, I have personal evidence, that there were some elements in the KGB that actually subscribed to the convergence theory. There was the time when Gorbachev took power, and some people were further to the left of Gorbachev. There was a thawing going on there, even in the intelligence service. So I was still serving my own country, the German Democratic Republic. The wall didn't come down after I quit. Here's where my doubts came, and they were personal. I loved my job. The company, MetLife, took really good care of its employees. It felt almost like working for a East German company. You do a good job, they pay you well. The MetLife even gave us free lunch. But most importantly, I loved what I was doing. Using my creative spirit to write code. I told people that I would want to do this even if I don't get paid. It was like a hobby that I got paid for. That's a good way for a good job to have. And then I made a lot of friends. And the department that I worked in, there were about 70 people maybe, and of those 70, there were maybe 25 up to 30 were computer geeks like me, and we got along fabulously. It was fun interacting with them. We spoke the same geek language, and interestingly enough, that felt like the United Nations. We had a Cuban national, we had a Ukrainian, 3 Russians, 4 Russians, several black African Americans, but I was the only white born American. It's just
hilarious when you said
it is hilarious. But, it was so much fun, and, we socialized occasionally, and I still remember one day, I'm getting out of the subway and take the last 2 steps for work, and I'm thinking, one day I have to leave them. I'm going to miss these guys. So there was a little bit of crumbling around the edges of this rock. and had it taken longer, that crumbling could have destroyed Iraq. I can't predict this. You never know. So this is what I do. You ask me short questions, and I come up with long answers.
It's there's a depth to this. It's
Yeah.
not just a glib response. So this wasn't necessarily shifting loyalties.
No, it was not. Not at that point.
Yeah, this was more just a sense of what I guess what you were finding the value in, just on a personal level, and just recognizing I don't know if I want to give this up.
There was no action at this point. There was no thought of acting, but having thoughts that I hadn't had 5 years before.
And that can be the same for anything in life. I used to love working for this company. Now I just suddenly realised that I don't. Or I used to love this car. Now I'm not so keen on it. I mean, things you don't always know the day, right?
Yeah. There's a day when you most likely act on the beliefs that start out as seedlings.
So moving that forward, what happened? At any point, was there a request to return home? Was there any,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was not a request, it was a command. So again, I don't know what triggered it, but the KGB was very, very protective of their illegals. Not because they loved us so much, but because if we were arrested, it made it very uncomfortable for them, because they had to get us out. If they don't get us out, nobody signs up for that job. They told me, if you ever go to jail, we'll get you out. So getting somebody out requires to set somebody else up, an American, put him in jail, and all this. And also, there was always the danger that if I get arrested, that I cooperate with Americans. So that's why they were really nervous. And somebody must have indicated something, probably sort of fuzzy, along the lines of, you guys have an illegal in New York, and the FBI is investigating this guy. I know at that time there was another illegal, a German citizen, who was in the United States. He had a job at Columbia University. So maybe they investigated him, I don't know. But clearly they didn't investigate me, because the FBI told me that they didn't have a clue that I existed. But so the KGB had reason to believe that I might get busted. So they ordered me home. And we had an emergency protocol that meant for me to, as soon as I get that order, to just run for the border with Canada and make my way to the Soviet embassy, and they would get me out of the Western world with a forced passport, and that was it. That sounded pretty simple. I also had emergency documents that I had hidden in a park in the Bronx, and I was supposed to get those documents, but not even once I see there was a signal. It was a red dot on a beam that supported so it still supports the elevated portion of the subway train, the A train. And once I saw that red dot, I was supposed to get the documents, and I was always required to have enough cash on me so I wouldn't have to go to a bank or to go home. Just get out and get across the bridge between, the Niagara Falls Bridge. In those days, you could go across that bridge without showing documentation. I had investigated that. Not anymore. Now you have to show at least a driver's license or something. And so, that was the order. And if I not married with a child, I would have gone. No doubt about it. My life in the U.S. wasn't comfortable enough to stay, and my life behind the Iron Curtain would have been incredibly upscale, because I had I don't know, $50,000-$60,000 in savings in dollar denomination. That was a lot of wealth in behind the Berlin Wall. They had promised me a house once I'm done with that particular assignment. I would have still worked for the KGB, short assignments, would have been able to travel to the West and buy Western goods and, take care of my family. I mean, it would have been the life of Riley, as they say. Never did I imagine that the wall would come down, right? If the wall is down, I'm not going anywhere, because I didn't want to wind up in Russia. So it was just me knowing that going back home would be very good for me. But what trumped all of that was this unconditional love that I had for my 18-month-old daughter. This was the first time that true love.
Just to catch us up there, Jack, you're now married in the US?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay.
Well, yeah, obviously I was unfaithful to my wife, but this was part of the assignment. To live as a normal individual, you have to have a girlfriend. You can't just, because if you, as an asexual or potential homosexual, you couldn't mingle freely with, in those days. There was a lot of stigma attached to that. So I had to, and I went for safe choice. I was looking in the Village Voice, where you could, there were dating pages where you could, try to make a connection. Nowadays it's on the internet, and I was looking for a dark-skinned lady. First of all, I like dark-skinned, but secondly, they were most likely. There were more of a likelihood, not most likely, that they were actually not born in this country. And I found one that wasn't born in this country. It was very pleasant. She came from Guyana, and she wouldn't have possibly known that I wasn't 100% American at the time. So yeah, no, I had a girlfriend, and I could socialize. I would take her and to some of the events, and that was good. And then she dropped the bomb. One day she told me that she was illegal. She had worked as a flight attendant for Guyana Airways, and just decided to stay in the country and stay with a friend of hers. So she asked me if I could marry her. Damsel in distress syndrome. She shared with me that she had paid a guy $10,000, and he didn't marry her. Or he married her, and then he didn't file for the green card. So I felt really sorry for her. She cried in front of me, and it's like, I don't know what to do, because back home it's like horrible. Blah. So, she was a nice woman, and I did some research, and I figured I had what it takes. I had the documents, and I interviewed a friend of hers who went through something like that, and I was advised that the question that trips up people who are not really living together is, would they take them separate and ask them to describe the living room and stuff like that, and favorite TV shows, and and what we eat for dinner and so forth. So I practiced that, and I was pretty confident that we would pass. Um, and that practice wasn't necessary because she decided what I told her with regard to this arrangement. I said loud and clear, because I was still dead set to go back to and live out the rest of my life with my German family. And I said to her, I'm not the kind of guy who wants to live in marriage. So when you have your green card, we get a divorce. And she agreed. And obviously, I said, and I hope you stay on the birth control pill, because the last thing I want is a child here. Well, she decided to get pregnant. Okay, because another vestige of cultural ignorance. This is even nowadays. Now the immigration situation is quite different now, but up until recently, illegal ladies tried to capture a man and make a child with him, and that works a lot, and it wound up working for me in my case as well, because I fell in love with this girl, and that was the first time that love in here was not attached to lust. It was real. It was genuine. It was unexpected, crept up on me, and I wasn't even fully aware of that it did, but in the end, going back and risking being arrested and risking by not going back, risking to be interpreted as a defection, all of that told my rational mind, you have to go back. On the other hand, there was the knowledge that if I did not stay, I couldn't take care of this child, and her mother had only 4 years of schooling. They would have grown up in poverty, both of them. So in the end, the decision was to stay. It was the dumbest decision I ever made with regard to self-preservation, with regard to logic. The logic could have said, if I stay, I get arrested. I'm not good for these people anyway. Actually, the wife might be kicked out of the country, and the poverty would be even greater. So there was the rational mind said, you got to go, but the love trumped that. So when I say stupid, good stupid. Sometimes our decisions, we make a lot of decisions based on gut feeling, and if we sometimes sit down and think about the decision, we come up with an answer, and then your gut overrides the rational decision, and it turned out to be the right decision to begin with. It's not always, but it happens, and it, in my case, happens more frequently than I expected when I went for my degree in chemistry and taught math and logic in college.
Can I ask you a difficult question?
There are no difficult questions unless you make them difficult for yourself.
How did you rationalize family in Germany and what they would have to go through?
That was relatively easy to do. Because the one thing that I was certain of, that my son would be well taken care of, because of the story that I shared with the KGB. I imagined that the story was that the reason for defying that command to go back was that I had incurred the HIV, AIDS virus, and in those days it was more or less a death sentence. But I said, I want to stay in this country. I might get treatment here, but no place else. And they believed that story. I didn't know this until many years later, but since there was a good chance that they would, I knew that they might even comply with my wishes to give to my German wife the dollar savings that I had. There's evidence. My son told me that she got some money, not all of it. Somebody probably took some of that for themselves. That's in espionage, cash is the only currency. Now it could be Bitcoin as well. But anyway, so I knew that materially they wouldn't suffer, and Gerlinde had a very, very strong family structure. I had spent time with her parents. She had a nice, very intelligent brother. I knew that my son, without me, would do okay, and he did. He has a doctorate in chemistry now. And I knew that without me, Chelsea, my daughter, would struggle tremendously. So that was the rationale. I couldn't really dwell much on the betrayal of Gerlinde because I just chose not to think about it, because I still loved her, even when I made the decision to stay with Chelsea. But minor rationalization, I didn't leave her for another woman.
There's something about maybe the reason you get chosen to do a role like this is because of the capacity to compartmentalize.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's one thing when I called them the KGB, the Keystone Cops, the way they recruited and screened me was outstanding. I mean, if you don't do this well, you're sending somebody out who will fail right from the beginning. Loneliness, oh my God, what do you do? I spent a lot of time alone, but I managed to deal with that. One of the things was music. I bought a pile of long-playing records and played classical music all the time. Nobody taught me that. That was just something that came, I wanted to do, and it worked.
How did you move? Did you get onto the FBI's radar, or did that happen triggered by you? Was there something that happened for that to occur?
No. The FBI did not know that I exist until there was a betrayal. There was a fellow by the name of Vasily Mitrokhin. He was the head archivist of the first directorate for the KGB. He was in charge of the archives. First directorate was espionage. And this interesting, that was a security hole. The guy could smuggle out bits and pieces of information in small little on paper strips. He hand copied them, and then when he went back home, he transcribed them with a typewriter. And when he eventually wound up at MI6 at the British embassy in one of the Baltic countries, he told him that he had several boxes worth of documents collected over a period of about 10 years. And so what made him do this? He had had developed a deep hatred of the Soviet system and the KGB because he was reading stuff and he found all this stuff like the murderous nature of that organization. And I believe there was also a situation that his son was very ill, and there could have been treatment. And the only country where there was treatment available for that illness was your country, the UK. And obviously they didn't allow him to go there. So this hatred made him just do what he did. He got away with it. And eventually the information that he collected, there was just a little tidbit in it that says there is an illegal KGB agent in the Northeast, and I think he knew the last name Barsky. I think it was Barsky because I got that information in hindsight. It was shared with me by the KGB how they found me, and so the KGB got the FBI got that information, and they did a little bit of research. There are not too many Barskys in this country. And the one that got his Social Security card at an unusual age, at the age of like 30, whatever, 5, was even older. I think it was close to 40. That was the man. So they started observing me, watching me, not knowing whether I was still active or not. One comment here. So I was betrayed. And the irony of all of this is if Mitrokhin was still alive, and I could meet him, I would thank him from the bottom of my heart for this betrayal. Okay? Because without that, I would not be able to talk to you today. Without that, I would still be living in secret and would not have been able to come to terms with my past, which I am now. So thank you, Vasily, wherever you are these days. And the FBI took 2 years to eventually introduce themselves. They wanted to be sure that I wasn't active anymore because they knew that, one thing they knew that I had survived altogether 15 years undetected. So they knew that I was very well trained, and if they got too close to me, I would most likely run. I would find out that they're investigating me. So they kept at a distance until they came to the conclusion that I wasn't active anymore, and that was the time when they introduced themselves.
And how does that go? Hijack. What was the point? Just to say, we just want to let you know that we know, or actually, are you in a position where you can be of use to us now because we could actually make your life, technically put you in prison. So how does that go?
Similar to the KGB, they didn't explicitly state what they were after. So it was just an introduction, sort of a hijacking, yes, in a sense. They knew that I commuted to work from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, and I had to go across a bridge over the Delaware. It's a toll bridge, so you have to slow down and just you got to stop. And in those days, you put a quarter in. And so they rented themselves a state police, state trooper with a uniform. As I ease out of the toll gate, he waved me over, and so I stopped, and he said, "State police, routine traffic control." That's what he said. And I had long forgotten that I once was a spy. That was not anywhere near the top of my mind. And I said, okay, so, and instead of what every policeman does next, they would say, open the window and let me see your license and registration. He said, could you please step out of the vehicle? I still didn't have a clue what that meant. because I was just not focused that way. But then there came from my right, there came a man in civilian clothes, and as he walked up to me, he flipped open a wallet, and I didn't have to look at it. At that point, I knew that that was FBI or whatever. You know, it wasn't good news. And he actually said, FBI, we would like to have a talk with you. That was, I'm not calling it the scariest moment of my life, but the most dramatic one. When, you know, everything in a moment changed drastically, and there was an implicit threat. Okay, clear, and it was implicit, but it was stated. You know, FBI, that I knew that means, you know, I could be arrested. And so they told me to step into a car. And there was, he had a partner, obviously they always work with partners. And this guy was sitting in the back seat, and I was placed next to him, and this fellow had a gun strapped to his ankle, very visibly. A little bit of psychological game. That didn't bother me. But, you know, they were saying, you know, we're serious. And I broke the ice. I started talking. I asked him, am I under arrest? And Joe Riley, that was the lead agent, he said, no. That's it. Okay, so I'm not under arrest. And so now I did something that people like me, that's why one of the reasons that the KGB recruited me, I did something that would help me take a little control of the situation, a little bit, and inject humor into the situation. I asked him, so what took you so long? Instinctive, right? And this is confirmed. I mean, the FBI guy who is still a friend of mine, who was the lead agent, he confirms that. I asked that question. Instinctive. I didn't think about it. But my instinct said, you got to like these guys. You got to establish a personal relationship. And then actually Riley said something. He volunteered. He said, Jack, that may not be the worst day. This may not be the worst day of your life. That's all. It wasn't. We want you to cooperate, and then maybe we'll think about, treating you nicely. They led me to a motel, and they had rented all the rooms in that motel, and it was L-shaped, and then one of the corridors, they had an armed guard at each end, and I was led to the center room of this particular section, and a little more psychological games playing. They had decorated that room with some written material, large letters, where there was information that they knew about me that was available. I don't know how they got to it. Some of it came from Mitrokin and some of it came through their research, where they were saying, well, we know a lot about you. Like one of them was a convenience address. Convenience addresses where I sent letters to third countries in secret writing. But I hadn't lost my mental acuity, and I pretty soon noticed that this was all dated. There was no recent information. But nevertheless, I knew that I had to take control, and I did. I told before they could even ask any questions. I said, "Gentlemen, I know one thing for sure, that for me and particularly my family, to get out of this situation with the least amount of damage, I have to cooperate, and I intend to do so fully and completely." I could have meant this, and I did, but it was enough for them to let me go. After talking, they asked me a whole bunch of questions. It was the beginning of not an interrogation; it was a debriefing. And just before letting me go home, they allowed me to call my wife and told her, like, I'm going to be late because I'm delayed at work. And then they had a huge team, surveillance team, distributed all over the place, just in case I run. And the head of the surveillance team talked to me, and he said, "If you think you can run, we got every intersection covered." I still think I could have gotten away because I lived in the country, and I had a backdoor entry that wasn't a door. It was I don't know what they call this, a plate that you can lift up out of the basement. I could have snuck out in the dark and walked my way for a long, into the mountains, and I could have had money stashed away, which they actually knew I did. But that money was to buy my wife an engagement ring. So anyway, I digress. So I'm home.
How long was the debrief? Was it just
The
one day,
debrief,
or
it was once a week for a couple of months, one-on-one with the lead agent. He asked me about everything, like every detail that I could share with him, my upbringing. What there was nothing that they didn't deem valuable. They also later on sent two psychologists, top-notch U.S. psychologists, to test me. I had to take tests for 2 days in a row. And again, it was about 2 months, and at the end of the 2 months, I had to pass a lie detector test. The FBI swears by those tests. And I was told later on the guy who the examiner was the top examiner in the Northeast for the FBI. They wanted to make sure that I hadn't told him anything wrong, and it was probably protocol, you got to check that box. I'm sure Riley knew that I was dead honest already at that time. But it was interesting, that test. There are all kinds of ways of conducting that test. Very often it's hostile. People will like shine light on you and they yell at you and say, I'm gonna find out what that. I know that you're yelling. I'm gonna figure this one out. And I've others, and like ex-CIA and ex-FBI told me that they had been subject to those kinds of tests. It's normal, okay? Mine was extremely polite. I knew all the questions in advance. There was no light. I was seated comfortably. And the only answers allowed were whispered yeses and nos. That's it. So it was about, and we did a test without even the equipment on me. All right. So amazing, right? Well, really? Does it work? Well, they made it work. And this is something that I found out also. I found out so many things about me and what happened to me, and the reasons for this, that, and the other by interacting with intelligence agents or just getting information in some other way. So I took the test, the live test, and the examiner went back to his office. He came back after 20 minutes and he said, I don't know if he called me Mr. I don't know. He probably called me Mr. Barsky. We got a problem here. I said, what is it? You failed this one test. And he showed me a printout. And there was a spike. And I said, there's no way I lied. I told you the truth, yes or no, whatever the truth was, whether it was yes or no, as I know it. There was no, not even a thought of lying. He said, yeah, but that machine doesn't lie. So, and this was all a setup. So I asked him, can you tell me what the question was? And he said, yeah. And I'm looking at the question. It was an innocent question. And I said, how would that trigger the machine? And then I said, wait a minute. That's a double negative. He said, oh my God, yeah. You're right. That could have triggered it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. That bastard put it in there on purpose. I'm sorry to call him a bastard, it's just to be funny here. I had to fail that test. Just that little hesitation to make the double negative into a positive, so I answered correctly, needed to trigger that machine. So that means that any other attempt of me lying, the machine would have caught it. And I was that theory that I developed eventually was confirmed by a couple of polygraphers that are experts in taking these tests. They say that's a proven technique. They sometimes use that.
It's a baseline.
Yeah, it's a really good baseline. And after I passed that test, they finally told me explicitly, you're allowed to stay, your family's allowed to stay, and we're going to work on getting you genuine documentation, and that eventually there's a path to citizenship.
So you clear it with the US, which is a remarkable journey just in itself. Did you ever think, are there going to be any repercussions? Will the KGB be watching? Where's he going? Am I under observation there? Was any of that going through your head?
That's a legitimate question, and I addressed this right away. I spoke with the FBI and I told them, okay, so it's been 10 years since I lied to the KGB. Since they hadn't come after me, I believe that they bought the lie. So there's no indication that they were investigating me in some way, shape, or form. For quite a while, I did, surveillance detection and took some other measures that would help me decide, find out, for instance, whether somebody opened a letter, so that the FBI, this was about the FBI. But anyway, surveillance detection, there was never any indication, and I was not loud in public. I existed, but they would have had to actually look for me, and apparently they did not. Had they looked for me, they would have most likely done some damage right then and there. So they wrote me off. That was a educated guess, and the FBI agreed with my reasoning that I would be eventually, if I wanted to go back to Germany and connect with my past, I would be safe in friendly countries. Never ever go back to Russia, and never ever go to countries that have friendly relationships with Russia. Like, for instance, right now, just not to pull out a country as bad, but Turkey was mentioned quite a bit, because in Turkey, I think one of the Russian intelligence agencies actually committed assassinations. So I feel in this country as well as in the Western world, I feel safe.
What was your stepping stone into the public space?
Yeah, my stepping stone. I didn't want to become a public figure. I wanted to live my life out quiet, and I did tell my family. And I had to tell, my wife, she would have suspected that something is a little bit off because, I had all these meetings that had nothing to do with work and so forth. So, and then I decided to share my the past with my children, my daughter, both of them after they hit 18, so when they became adults. And when I shared this, when Chelsea, my daughter, and I sat down with my son, he got really excited and he said, "Dad, you need to write a book." And I said, no. Yeah, and then Chelsea said, yeah, write a book. You should. And she she was in college at the time, and a professor of hers who taught literature told her how to go about it. And Chelsea told me, you need to you can't approach publishers, you need to go through literary agents. So I looked for literary agents. I sent emails to 10 of them, because I now had decided I would want to go into the public because my kids wanted me to. So I sent emails to 10 literary agents in the realm of true crime. That was the right subject matter. And in the email, there was barely a full page of my history, just to give them an understanding of the complexity and potentially uniqueness of my story. I got one response out of 10, and that was a guy who told me in his email, he said, "I will gladly write your story, but I will charge $20,000. So I drew the conclusion that since they didn't want to take this, they didn't believe the story. And that conclusion turned out to be 100% correct, because when my first appearance in public was the interview with CBS 60 Minutes, and that had in total like 15 million viewers, but when it was first viewed, it was several million. 60 Minutes was very popular in those days. And after that, I had agents and publishers reaching out to me. So all of a sudden, I was a public figure. And oh, by the way, this was even much later, like 20 years after my resignation. And for that reason, I don't, I'm not in danger of being assassinated by the KGB by the FSB or the SVR, with one exception, and that is if I wind up in Moscow, I might fall out of a window. You know why? Not because of revenge. It's because to send the signal, we're going to get you, the signal to the existing agents that they have. So if you think you can get away with this shit, I'm sorry, now I said it. We know where to find you, and no Russian would have to say anything. It would have been, would have leaked into the Western press, and the targets would become aware of it, because it would have been it would have been big in the Western press, right? So that's why I don't show up in Moscow. But that's how I became a public figure. The story how CBS 60 Minutes found me is a story, again, I had decided the publishers don't want me, the agents don't want me, so I'm done. I'm not doing anything anymore. So I did nothing to become public, nothing, zero. And the story how I became a public figure had to do with a lot of many dots that had to be connected, and I had nothing to do with the dots. I had something to do with some of the dots, but nothing to do with the connections. It started out with my wife's brother. My wife, my then wife, is originally from Jamaica, and she had a number of half brothers, some of whom she was in touch with, and this one happened to wind up in Germany. But his mother took him to Germany to get away from his non-existing nasty father. And anyway, it wasn't nasty to non-existent. And he was in touch with Shauna, my wife then, and he had befriended, or he had met, while still in Jamaica, a French painter, an itinerant French painter who really loved the boy. He spent a couple of years in Jamaica, and he wanted to almost adopt him, but they decided not. It's not good for his life, but they kept in touch. Well, speaking of that, this French painter once found, during his travels, connected with an executive of L'Oreal, who lived at the time, he is not with us anymore, in a town of Hudson, New York, had a mansion there, and he invited the painter to come visit him, and the painter liked Hudson, New York. It's very picturesque, and he bought himself a farmhouse to store a lot of his art, in a farmhouse with a couple of acres. And one day he invited his young friend Richard, my wife's brother, to come to visit. And it so happened that at the time we lived only an hour drive from Hudson. The number of things had to happen for me to move there. I had to be fired from a well-paying job and be hired from a job that made me move the family to the Albany, New York area. So, and then Richard, said that he told Shauna by phone that he had arrived in the U.S. He had not planned to visit us. He planned to visit the painter, and it turned out that he found out that we were close by. So I picked him up. He came to visit, and Shauna had told him a little bit about my German past, and so he asked me curiously. He said, "So how did you get here?" Because he knew how Shauna made it. She made it as a bilingual secretary for the United Nations. That's how she became a U.S. citizen eventually. So, and I told, just with my odd sense of humor, I said, I had some help from the government. I said, "Oh, what government? The American or the German?" I said, No, the Soviet government. "Oh, what?" Well, and I unpacked my past to him, and he took notes. And then he said, when on his way out, after spending a couple of days with us, he said, "Jack, I'm going to take that to Germany, and this story is going to be big." And I'm thinking, all right, the guy is subject. He has a tendency to exaggerate, and he's just like, everything to him is big. So I'm thinking, yeah, okay, a literary agent didn't buy into this story. He was a conductor at the German railroad in those days, at the Bundesbahn. And what can he do to blow up the story? Well, what he did, he had a friend who he was roommate with when this guy was in college, studied for a master's degree in Chinese studies. And as part of that, he acquired the art of Feng Shui, or however you pronounce this. the art of configuring your living space to be spiritual. And he had a lot of interesting clients, and his top client was the number one journalist, female journalist of Der Spiegel. Okay? So they told her about me. She did some research. She had enough access to some materials in the archives. Not much, but she had enough information to sort of believe the story. Called me up and said, I want to interview you. I said, there's no way I can't be interviewed. I'm not a citizen yet. Well, I got my citizenship, and I told her, I had a phone number. I told her, no, if you still want to talk, that's fine. Let's have coffee together. And that's it. And when I get to the airport and I enter the arrivals hall at the airport in Berlin, I have a camera and a microphone in my face, because she knew she had a real story at that point. And so she followed me for like 4 or 5 days through the Rip Van Winkle-like travels through my past, and interviewed me like nobody ever interviewed me before. I mean, that was my first real interview, right? And it was days, and she took copious notes. And then there's another dots that had to be connected. She personally knew Steve Croft, the star of CBS 60 Minutes in those days. And she did something that no self-respecting journalist would consider doing, but she had a reason for that. She gave away a scoop. She told him that I exist. And that could have easily resulted in 60 Minutes, get the story first. Well, they made an arrangement that the Spiegel was, because it was print, they could go first, and it was in German. But so that is, and there are more things that had to happen further in the past that I didn't mention that made me a public figure. Totally none of my doing. And so one day, the producer of 60 Minutes called me at the office and told me he wants to come visit me and talk with me about what we could do together. Let me just allow me to say this because it's important. Can you blame me, knowing this? Can you blame me that I believe in a higher power? That was arranged. I know a little bit statistics. I knew that the probabilities of all these dots connecting without somebody actually orchestrating it is less than a trillion to one, because probabilities are you multiply. If one is point one, and the next one that needs to happen is 0.1, all of a sudden it becomes 0.001. Before you know it, there's a lot of zeros. That was insane. And it extends the fact that I'm speaking to you is even more improbable. Sorry, I digress again.
Not at all. And just look, the only reason I'm just kind of about to kind of round us off is just respecting your time and just recognizing the attention span of people.
Thank you. And I do have in a half hour, I have my weekly call with a producer, the would-be producer of my miniseries based on my story.
So where is your energy now? What is it that is taking your interest, that you're putting your energy into? What is the world asking of you?
I got to share that with you. There's another one of those quote-unquote coincidences, and I have to reach back to how this happened, and we'll conclude with where my focus is nowadays. The purpose for being, the reason I'm getting up in the morning, and it has evolved over time. So it starts with another thing that I did not foresee, that I did not initiate. I have this marketing campaign on LinkedIn, and I got a lot of exposure for that. The marketing is primarily to get me out in the public for mentoring and public speaking. At that time, the reason for me to get up was number one, taking care of my 14-year-old daughter, brilliant child, and I feel I want to start her in life the same way I started the other two children. That was number one, and number two, I wanted to. There's a lot of confusion in the world these days for what makes for a real man, and that starts with young men, but it reaches now up into the upper echelons, and that's not good for society. So I figured if I can do a little bit of mentoring and make money in the process and help help Trinity and her mother, who I am not married to anymore, that would be a good combination, and it would make me feel good. And I always liked helping people, always, always. So
Why
that
would
would
people
also.
approach you, Jack? What would they approach when it comes to either public speaking or it comes to mentoring? What would
Oh,
be, this is my sweet spot. This is where I can really help you.
are you talking about the subject matter?
Yeah, if somebody's listening to this and they think, I'd like to reach out to Jack, why would they? What would they be reaching out
Why
to you
would they?
for?
Okay, and thank you for asking that question. Simply because mentoring is not the same as teaching. Okay, teaching is much easier to sell. You have a course and you learn this, that, and the other, and then you are better than you were before. That very often doesn't work. Teaching, you can teach skills, but I'm in the realm of human behavior, and that is acquired. It takes a lot longer. First of all, it starts out with getting to know yourself. You know how many people I've met, adults who don't know themselves? And if you don't know yourself, um, you don't even know what your true strengths and likes and dislikes and weaknesses are. And if you are focused on, and society is very often focused on, killing your weaknesses instead of working with your strengths, which makes for a much happier and more successful existence. I have, I am now very comfortable with who I am. It took a long time and took a lot of feedback from the outside, but what I have learned over time with interacting with so many people, I can help people to get to know themselves really well, and that's the beginning. And then the mentoring is all about helping people making good decisions in the situations that they're in. Uh, I have a mentee, no names named here, who is in transition, had a job for a long time, 2 decades, very successful in one particular industry. It's all about professionalism, but wants to do something that is more fulfilling. But she never floated a resume. So this is a bit of hand holding. It's also a bit of cheerleading. It has to be genuine. I don't cheerlead like blah blah blah. That's meaningless and it is counterproductive. It has to come from from here, from the gut, and that's why I will only work with people that I can relate to, that I understand that they have a lot to give and they're not even aware of it. So the bottom line is to learn by doing, and you know that there are schools like to mind comes the Waldorf School, and there's another one I forgot the name that use experiential learning, And there's proof that this works a lot better than classroom-based learning. And so in this case, I'll just be the person with whom you can discuss things, talk about upcoming decisions, drawing conclusions, and then retain that knowledge for the future. That's how you get better. It's not overnight. And one other thing that happens a lot with people like you and me, people who like to think, we come up with ideas while we're talking. And that happens to me a lot. I talked to a friend and said, "Oh, by the way, I just came up with this idea. I think this is where I'm going." That's how mentoring works. It happens to me a lot. Some of the most original ideas that I have come from my subconscious. They're already there, and they're shaken loose by speaking out loud. So that's, and in this sense, there is an element of life coaching involved, but I'm trying to do this in the context of the business environment because in addition to having been a pretty decent, successful spy, I also have a lot of experience in the corporate world. I went all the way up to the corporate suite, and I collected a lot of information. It made a lot of experiences, good, bad, or indifferent. And now I have been in the entrepreneurial world for 10 years, so I also know what the transition is like. It wasn't easy. I didn't have a mentor. I had to figure this out through painful mistakes. So I can help people also when there's people who want to go one way or the other way. And anyway, there's always the corporate world and the business world is full of landmines. And I stepped into quite a few of those. I'm a little more aware of them, and I'm very good at like what the FBI folks did and what the KGB recruiters did. I'm very good at asking questions to get to know you and help you and help you draw your own conclusions and own the decisions that you make. That's pretty long. Thank you for allowing me to do that.
Listen, I'm going to put the links to your book deep on the cover and to you on LinkedIn. I'll put all of that and make that available.
Yeah, no,
This is my.
this was really good. And with regard to finding me right now, it's on LinkedIn. Just look
I'll put the
by
links
name,
in.
Jack Barsky. But there's a website out there that's still functional, but it will be replaced pretty soon.
So here's my last question.
Yes, sir.
Where's the love in your life right now? Where's it coming from?
Yeah, so this is where we're going to the purpose thing again. Thank you for bringing me back there. So, yeah, I got sidetracked. Thanks for putting me back on track. So that what I'm so I'm with this I'm running this campaign on LinkedIn to get me known, and one day I get a lady making an appointment for an introductory call, a Zoom call, and as I do with every one of those, I accept them and I look up and do some research on the person. That person, I misspelled the name, and the person was known to me as a producer out of Switzerland. So I figured I would politely end that call very quickly because I don't need a producer out of Switzerland, and I couldn't possibly be of value to them. So I start saying this like hemming and hawing a little bit, and this lady says, "Well, just wait a little. Let's talk for a while." This is okay. And we started a little small talk about likes and dislikes. And there was some interesting matches. She knew a little bit about the Soviet Union. We're talking about a mature black woman. That's rare for Americans, black, white, and otherwise. She mentioned not just Putin, but also Gorbachev. I said, oh, yeah, I'm very curious. I read a lot of stuff. So then we got to literature, and she had read some of my favorite French authors, like Balzac, for instance. So then now I'm getting curious. What kind of music you like? Oh, all kinds of music. You like classical? Oh, yeah. What's your favorite Beethoven piece? It's For Elise. Mine too. I said, what? So now we knew that she said she would disclose to me that she's a teacher. Says you can't afford me as a mentee, but I tell you what, I like you so much, and it turns out she's also of the Christian faith. And I said, you know what, I want to be friends with you. You're such an interesting person, and we have so much in common. I think we can sort of learn from each other. And at the end I said, by the way, I love you like a sister. And she said, I love you too. And we talked again, and we found even more stuff in common. And then I tested her on some other things. I was trying to find some gaps, and I found one where she didn't know one thing. So I asked her about, Beatles. Do you like Beatles? Well, not very much, but do you have a favorite Beatles song? May I ask you Guy, what's your favorite Beatles song? Most people answer this with the same.
Mine is Yellow Submarine.
Oh, that means you're a little quirky. Me too. I like that one too. Most people answer Yesterday.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Oh. All right. No comment here. I like that one too, but I told her my favorite song is Blackbird because it's performed so very well, and it has deep meaning. And she didn't know the song. And I sent her a link on WhatsApp. She listened to the song, and I get a WhatsApp message back that has 2 blackbirds on a branch, and underneath there was a text that says, I've been looking for you all my life. Teach me how to fly. I still have that, okay? And you can't make this thing up. And, that wasn't exactly I love you, but the next message I had emojis that, the people use emojis when they use the heart, the red heart, that means I like it. This was an emoji with a smiling face that had a hearts around it. So now I get the message. I say, and I ask her, like, are you falling in love with me? She said, duh. And I already had this feeling in my, I get this feeling in my gut when I really like something, love something. It doesn't have to be a woman. It can be an idea. It can be a plant, an animal, something. I get this like electrical storm here. And I had this while talking with her because we were so incredibly well matched, and giving our different backgrounds. She grew up in an urban slum in the Midwest. I grew up in the country. I grew up a communist. She's a pastor's daughter, and we matched so well. So I don't remember if I ever said I love you until we met. She lives an hour, 2 hours away. We met in person, and here comes here comes something. We are both quirky also. And we meet, she already made me laugh many times. I mean, laugh out loud. No other woman could ever do that. So we meet in person for the first time, and I I was concerned with how this would work out, and but there was no awkwardness. I met her brother outside of where she lives, and this brother hugged me. Never met him, never spoke with him. That means she must have shared something with him, and so this was not, a flirtatious thing. It was pretty deep. So anyway, I tried to make her laugh and shared a situation with her when I used humor to make an introduction into the corporate world. It was I was hired as a CIO at a corporate at a Fortune 500 company. It was a very high level position in a large company, and I was on day one. I was introduced to all my peers, not the CEO, all the other C-level folks, and one was missing. She wasn't there, and she told me that you need to go and introduce yourself tomorrow. I won't be able to. And she told me, by the way, I'm warning you. She's a little bit weird. She has an odd sense of humor. I said, you think if I can connect with her with some humor, would that work? She said, yeah, try it. So I walk in there. Just before I walk in, I put my Austin Powers dentures on. You have a picture, like they look like this, except discolored. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of time. I have a dental appointment. And she's like, huh? And then I took the dentures out and we had a big laugh, and we were friends for the rest of our existence in that company together. And here's the reason I shared that with you. I shared this with Inez, that's her name. And she laughed, and she reached for her purse and put out a pair of ugly dentures herself and put them in. This is, this is a movie scene. It's delicious, and I exploded, and we spend a lot of time laughing, and acting like children, and you know where that comes from. And now I'm going to get closer to the purpose. You know where that comes from is that she spent close to 25 years teaching children with autism. She went into that field. She has a master's degree in education, special ed, particularly autism, because she gave birth to 2 autistic children. Her firstborn couldn't speak for 9 years. So her passion is, he can talk, he can function. You wouldn't know that he was once so severely disabled. And she threw herself into this. This is her mission. This is her passion in life. And she's now going to expand this and leave the confines of the public educational system and widen her range. And she is amazing. And she diagnosed me psychologically too, and just she's so much fun to be around. It's just for that I love her, but I love her primarily because of the spirit in her, and I admire her. She's intellectually at my level. That helps too, by the way, and she knows as much as I do about so many things. But the passion that she has for doing good, and now you connect that with the fact that a 18-month-old changed my life. You know that I love children and young children. So my passion these days includes helping her to the extent I can to use most of her time if not all of, most of the time that she has available, in addition to taking care of herself, obviously, to follow her calling. And in that process, I'm going to try to make money with mentoring and speaking, and also I'm not, that I'm a Christian. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a pastor, but distributing the moral message that Christ has taught us to all comers by my behavior, treating everybody with love, and occasionally giving my testimony in church settings. So you put this all together, and you probably understand very well why I'm a happy guy, even though a lot of stuff happens that just is not the reason to be happy, but I know why I'm here. And that is why I'm gonna live another 50 years.
Listen, I'm going to bring this to a close. I don't want to, but I'm going to. Jack, I want you to stay on just for 2 minutes just to make sure everything uploads. From me, you've been an absolute joy. I have appreciated you. So,
well,
thank you.
And thank you for allowing me, first asking the questions that came at the end, and allowing me to just pour out my heart, because that's me. If there are many interviews where I can't do it, but it feels incomplete, because completion, I'm still working on it, but I made enormous steps towards becoming who I was supposed to become, and that is acknowledged by people who have known me for a long time, that the last 2-3 years I have changed dramatically. And I think I'm almost rid of the last vestiges of German behavior, except of maybe the discipline.
I've enjoyed the window into a journey, and that's
Thank you.
That means a lot to me on a personal level.
Well, and if you'll give me access to that video, I'm going to take some clips out. I don't know if I'm going to, but I have to check with the people I'm working with to what extent this can be used. It will be used for sure. It was very, very good.
You can have access to whatever.
And I also know that towards the end I actually got better. There was some time in the middle when I was got a little tired, but overall I'm not tired now. That means I did pretty well by my own standards.
Look, you stay with me for a minute. I'm just going to press stop here.
Oh yeah, no, don't worry about it. This was a drunk call.
So thank you so very much. That's it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Please tell other people, help spread the word. Interested in working with me? Go to livingbrave.com, hop onto LinkedIn, Guy Bloom, and of course, even buy the book, Living Brave Leadership, at amazon.com. Take care.